Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the latest in our series of webcasts. We're delighted today to be talking about risk management and the idea that managing risk requires us to be fast and agile, have visibility and control in a world which has certainly got more uncertainty in it than we might have expected. I'm the guy on the left. I'm Dan French. I know many of you, so welcome. I'm very pleased to welcome Justin Thornton, who's Director of Internal Audit Risk Management at Aston Martin Lagonda. Justin, welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to join you today and hopefully share some of my useful experiences in my current role as Director of Internal Audit and Risk Management at Aston Martin.
Thanks very much, Justin. We're going to probe you on some of these topics. So here's the theme. We've got 30 minutes. We're going to try and keep this to 30 minutes. We want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to talk a little bit about the business context of risk and the unknown. And then I'm going to hand over to Justin to give that Chief Audit Executive perspective and the balance that's really necessary in his role. You're going to hear a lot of good stuff from Justin. And then we're going to have a little fireside chat on 4 strategic issues. And you're probably wondering, how do you have a fireside chat on a webcast? Well, so are we, but we should find out in 15 minutes. And then we're going to finish that off with some thoughts to the road and some practical steps. Now, as we go through this, I'm sure you're going to have questions, not just on the pricing of the cars, but you're going to have questions about risk management and Justin's perspective. So please use the GoToWebinar interface or space. You can ask questions. Do them as they come across your thoughts, and we'll capture them at the end and we'll respond to them. We might not have time to answer them all live, but we'll definitely answer all of them by email, even if we don't get to all of them live. So that's that. So yeah, 30 minutes of that. So let's talk a little bit about risk. And it's an unusual term, certainly in English. I've never really thought about it in other languages, but risk in common language kind of means different things to the way we look at it in business context. And there's some really good definitions put together about risk, and it's this idea of the uncertainty of achieving objectives. And so risk can be things that can make things that can go wrong, but they can also reflect opportunity. And that image you see there, I think, is the Golden Gate Bridge in a particularly unusually wet summer, and where you can't see an awful lot and you've got to take care. So risk is about uncertainty, and I think it's a really important part because it takes away some of the negative imagery about risk management. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I mean, talking again about business context, it's a little bit about ambition versus reality. What can we actually achieve? What should happen versus what can we actually achieve? And it's important to think about when we have risks, we identify risks, we often put in place as an organization policies to mitigate, we implement controls to automate and to control those, control variability, and we monitor performance against these things, and then we take action. So it is a very active process, this kind of disc of risk on the left here. And I think it's kind of important to think about that. It's an active thing, it's not a passive checkbox idea. So to bring us very much into the theme of Justin's world, so you know, this is a view of risk. You've got the performance of a high performance car, you've got the risk of the tight hairpin bends in a mountain, looks like Switzerland to me, but you know, that's Justin on his weekends. But of course, sometimes, you know, you can't see much at all. And of course, Justin works very long hours, so that's probably him in the evening. So when we think about risk management and assurance and the role of internal audit, there is this great what used to be called 3 lines of defense, now referred to as 3 lines of assurance, which again, slightly more positive. And this idea that the overall governing body, the board and the audit committee kind of govern this whole process, but your first line of assurance is line management and internal controls who actually execute the work and actually are responsible for risks and outcomes. The second line of assurance is financial control and internal controls and security and risk management and business assurance. And the third line is internal audit, and then you have independent external audit as well. Now, typically these have been separated, and we're going to hear from Justin that he's taken a view that actually some of second and third line can be put under the same team, and we'll hear a little bit about that. But it's kind of interesting to think about these three lines and how it helps drive performance in the business, because it is about performance, it's about achieving outcomes. So with that, I'd like to introduce Justin, and tell us a little bit about your background and some, and then we'll get into the perspectives of risk and opportunity.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks very much, Dan. And apologies if I'm a little bit sniffly, just coping with one of those colds at the moment. But so brief bit of background in terms of why have I got some experience to talk about and share in this space is I joined Aston Martin in 2018, a month prior to our IPO, when we listed on the London Stock Exchange, with a remit to build a FTSE 250 equivalent internal audit and risk management team. I've also, since being in role, I've had the dubious joy of being responsible for leading our confidential reporting and whistleblowing investigations. I also look after our global insurance program, which goes very closely, fits sort of hand in glove with the risk management side of things. You know, when we cannot mitigate risk sufficiently, we might look to transfer it via insurance, for example. And from the 1st of January of this year, I actually also inherited the internal control stroke business assurance team into my organisation. So I kind of operate across predominantly the second and third lines of assurance and defence, but I see my role very much as being a really trusted advisor to management, who are the first line. You know, prior to joining Aston, very quickly, I had 4 years at Jaguar Land Rover as head of business assurance, running their SOX program, and then a couple of years at Royal Mail prior to that as head of audit and risk. And then way back when, I'm a chartered accountant with 14 years experience at PwC in external audit. So I'm a sort of quite long in the tooth audit risk and control practitioner. So that's my background. In terms of just delving a bit into what is risk management and why does it matter and how do we handle that at Aston, I think it's probably worth starting with the fact that I tend to think of risk management in a really simplistic way, which is whatever activity any employee or stakeholder in the business is undertaking, it should be to either manage or mitigate a risk which stands in the way of the company, Aston, achieving its strategic objectives, or to enable us to take advantage of an opportunity. So I always ask the question, if an activity that's being performed by someone in the business doesn't align with one of those, then we should really be questioning why are we doing it. If we're not managing or mitigating risk, or maximizing, leveraging opportunity, or enhancing performance, I should add, then it's probably wasted effort and not necessarily contributing to the greater good. For example, at Aston, you know, we're firm believers in standard processes, policies, standard ways of working that are repetitive and sustainable. You know, it's important when you're making cars that you do the same tasks in the same manner to make sure that quality is maintained. It goes from using the right torque wrench on the production line to ensure we're building cars to quality, to performing know your customer checks on direct sales customers to make sure that we're not facilitating money laundering, for example. So everything that people do within the business is in some way linked to risk management. And when you look at it that way, the responsibility for risk management clearly sits within management, the first line. And then with my second line hat on as head of enterprise risk management, my role is really to facilitate those first line people to make sure that we're identifying, assessing and responding to risk in an appropriate way. Further to that, it's interesting to think that the daily challenge I face is how do I balance those various roles and juggle those roles to make sure that we're managing risk effectively, but I'm also then giving the board and the audit and risk committee assurance that those risks are being managed appropriately. And so with my chief audit sort of hat on, everything I do again is really focused around those key risks, or for want of a sort of more common phrase, the principal risks that we face as a business, those significant risks that could affect us achieving our strategic objectives. And they can be broken down, in my mind, into two areas. There are those that are context specific, so those specific risks to Aston, those which we can probably exert more control and influence over, and then there are those general risks as well, which can be potentially less controllable or are just more generic in their sort of intent. And I think it's fair to say that over recent years, we've seen an increase in the number and impact of the sort of external risks and events, those which are less controllable or avoidable. And we're operating in, an increasingly volatile environment. The World Economic Forum, I think, have said that 30% of organisations expect to see further global catastrophes in the short term, which they define as within the next 2 years, and that increases to 60% in the next 10 years. And if we just look back, at recent history, the last 4 years we've had COVID, which shut our manufacturing down for 6 months. We furloughed 90% of our workforce for extended periods. We've got the Russia-Ukraine war, the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict, the Houthi disruption in the Red Sea. All of these things we have very little control over. They happen to us, but they impact our business. And so we have put in place activities, controls, procedures to manage our response to those, to make sure that we can be resilient despite what sort of happens to us that we can't directly mitigate against. So we can't predict exactly what's going to happen to us, but we can ensure that we know how to react when we face these levels of uncertainty. So one of the things we've done is prioritize our sort of business continuity and disaster recovery activities to make sure that we are prepared for the unexpected. But if I just talk a little bit briefly on some of the specific risks that we are managing that are more controllable. So at Aston, we obviously make and sell fantastic cars. They're quite expensive, but they are fantastic and they are worth it. I feel I should say that. But a car tends to have a 3 to 5 year development phase and then a 7-year life cycle. So it's really important for us that we deliver our programs on time. It's critical that when we say we're going to launch a car, be that a battery electric vehicle or a hybrid, or the last of the V12 Vantages, it's really important that we've got good controls to manage the risk of delivery. And that's around, how do we make sure we deliver on time to the right quality to meet customer expectations within budget. And we have a framework we call our product creation system that enables us to do that. It's a staging gateway process with a number of deliverables, and my audit team provides assurance over the effectiveness of that to the Audit and Risk Committee. So we know the risk, we've got the controls, and we provide the assurance in a timely manner. Similarly, things like supply chain is obviously a well-documented risk within the automotive industry. Supply chain, we have products, we have parts being shipped through the Red Sea that have had to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which adds 4 weeks to our supply product lead times. We've had to manage that by building buffer stocks, etc. These are real risks that again, we have plans in place and we have people tasked with monitoring these to make sure that they're being addressed on a appropriate, timely basis. And then regulation. Again, electrification is a massive sort of political hot potato at the moment. We've flip-flopped on the banning of combustion engines, the sale of new combustion engines it was originally 2040, it came forward to 2030, it's been deferred back to 2035. We have to, as a company, be able to respond to that in a timely manner. And when you look at the fact that it takes us 3 to 5 years to develop a product, it's really important that we're making robust decisions today based on robust, accurate information, and that we're able to manage those risks efficiently. And then general areas that we look at from a sort of, what do my Audit and Risk Committee want me to provide them assurance over? It's some of those general, more entity level type controls. Do we have delegations of authority? So do we have clear lines of authority and responsibility within the business? Do we have a corporate conduct code of ethics that everyone buys into? We recently launched our values, company values, for example, to drive the ways we work. You know, it's not just what we do, but it's how we do. It's important that we change the culture. You know, everything we do is underpinned by our IT systems and infrastructure. So we've invested heavily in a new ERP to enhance those controls and drive efficiencies in the way that we operate.
Okay, thanks, Justin. That's a great perspective. So now we're going to have our fireside chat. And you're probably going to wonder how we're doing it, but here we have the fire. Now, the sharp-witted amongst us all might realise, well, that's not quite a fire; it's a pizza oven. Well, whatever it is, it's very warm. So so draw your chair up, Justin. So you've given us a perspective of the role of risk management, the role of audit, and your support and trusted advisor for management. But we discussed some strategic issues, and you kind of touched on this a bit already, but talk to us a little bit about the evolving risk profile. Things are different. I mean, things are different now than they used to be, and they're becoming more different more quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is where, you know, risk management has to be seen as a living, breathing, dynamic activity. It's safe to say when I joined the company, our risk management activity was largely based around those key 6-monthly reporting periods where you had to report externally on what your principal risks were. And we'd kick the tires of our corporate risk register, and we'd you know, identify the things we're doing to address the risks, and we'd report on it, and then we'd wait 6 months, and then we'd have another go at it and think, oh, what new risks are there that we need to capture and assess. And you know, that's not really a fit for purpose approach anymore. It is dynamic. We mentioned volatility. You know, things are happening on a broader spectrum at a faster pace, and we're having to be much more agile to respond to them and prepare for the unexpected, as I said earlier.
How do you identify, in this much more volatile world, how do you identify risks in a different way to the old school way?
Yeah, so we have regular calendarized risk management committees every other month. So every 8 to 9 weeks, let's say, we have our group of risk champions that are 15 people who are senior managers or directors representing the functions across the business. And we literally get in a room, have our risk management committee. Standing agenda item is you know, emerging risks, or movers and shakers, as we like to call them as well. So and it's, you know, don't confine it to your area of the business or your speciality, but this is a real open table, blank sheet of paper. What are people aware of that we think we need to consider from a risk management perspective that's affecting us?
So it's kind of like, what's going to stop us meeting our objectives? Is that kind of the discussion? What's going to get in the way of achieving what we need to?
Yeah, exactly right. And you know, as I say, we obviously capture those risks on our corporate register. We do our assessment. We've got the usual 5x5 heat map. We look at pace of onset as well. So, you know, how quickly could this issue affect us? And you know, we don't pretend to be great and have this all sort of sewn up, because we didn't have global pandemic on our corporate risk register.
Right.
You know, but it was on the WEF's global risk list for the last 20 years. But it's like we managed to deal with that. And we still don't have pandemic on. But what we do have is we have risk factors in our 12 principal risks that relate to what would happen if we had another lockdown, for example. Similar to climate change. You know, climate change affects a massive number of risks.
So is this approach really part of making risk management more proactive? The fact is this part of your driver to make it more proactive rather than just responsive?
Yeah, very much so. And outside of that sort of risk management committee, I also sit down with each of the exec committee members on a quarterly basis to just discuss again, you know, it sounds obvious, but asking those obvious questions, you know, how sales and marketing, how are things going? What are the challenges? You know, China and Taiwan is a major concern at the moment. You know, we have roughly 25% of our business is Asia Pac based. And if something kicks off in China or Taiwan, that's likely to affect both our production from a parts supply, but also our ability to sell. If Trump if Trump wins the election in the US, you know, we may be facing 10% import tariffs. That's a significant number for our most major market. And so, as well as these conversations, one thing we're really trying to do, and investing a lot of time at the moment, is trying to develop a risk dashboard that basically presents key risk indicators that are based on quantitative measurable data that gives us a real-time view of the direction of travel of are our known risks increasing or decreasing. So for example, supply chain, critical to our business. We are starting to report now on a monthly basis, you know, short deliveries, defects per 1,000 parts, etc., late deliveries. If you're presenting that on a monthly basis, you can actually very quickly see on a sort of RAG rated dashboard which, you know, what's happening to us and how can we then proactively make decisions to address that. So do we need to flip a tier 2 supplier so that we're preserving supply? Do we need to move to air freight because of what's happening in the Red Sea? Those sorts of things. So how do we visualize that risk and then make sure that that's presented to the executive committee so they can actually see what's going on?
So that's a great point, because one of your strategic issues was about how to give assurance and, I guess, engagement with the executive committee and the board, and is that a key part of it?
Yeah,
smart way to visualize and illustrate.
Absolutely. So working with, you know, we think it's critical that every risk that's identified is owned by someone within the business. So you don't have these orphans. We know there's a risk, but no one's got their eyes on it. So we work with my second line hat on as head of risk management. We work with the risk owners to come up with, right, what are the key controls and what are the key risk indicators? Then with my assurance hat on, I do an internal audit around the accuracy of, you know, what are the controls and the governance procedures we've got around capturing the data and reporting the data, so that then the ExCo, the executive committee, when they look at the dashboard, they know that it's credible, they know that it's reliable, and actually they just look at which way's the needle going. You know, am I having more supply chain issues or fewer supply chain issues? Right. Retention of talent. Why are people leaving the business? Why are we losing people to competition? You know, or why is it taking us 3 months to fill an open position on average? That sort of data gives them real-time visibility.
That makes a lot of sense. So thank you. I'm going to move our chairs away from the fire now, but thanks, Justin. So we covered those topics, and we could talk for an hour on those, but we are going to be respectful of time. So just give us some thoughts, Justin, about this kind of balancing act. But you've kind of touched on it, the Risk Management Assurance Balancing Act. Just give us some thoughts, and then we'll run into the next theme.
Yeah, this is something I have to juggle and deal with daily, and I know people have differing views on, you know, can you, by operating in the sort of first and second line, does that undermine and impair my objectivity from a third line assurance provider role? And I have to say, I'm of the view that this comes down to personal integrity. So I sit down monthly with the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee and Chief Exec and the CFO, and literally explain, you know, this is what we're doing to try and improve risk management and provide assurance. Are you happy with what I'm doing? And it is a balance. You know, for me, it's better to make sure that management first line are doing what they should be doing to address risk and maximize opportunity. Providing assurance over that is great once we've got something up and running, and the assurance then gives people a comfort that those controls are sustainable. However, you know, if you know something's broken, there's no point trying to give assurance over something that's broken. You may as well just roll your sleeves up and get involved and fix it.
Yeah, I see your point. That's a great balancing act, and that definitely sheds some light on this you know, second and third line point. I will move on because we've got some questions coming through which we will hopefully get you to answer imminently. So I will just kind of bring some of this together. So one thing that comes out of our conversation, and I know it's a growing theme, that risk management, and we talked about this before, Justin, it's not a month-end activity or a checklist activity. Risk management is decision making. That's what it is, and it's about driving enhanced performance. And I like this kind of new the kind of refreshed view of this, and I like this image, and I'm sure you've all seen that. But I think it's great to talk about what gets in the way of us achieving our objectives and how do we drive enhanced performance, and that is what risk management's about, which is different to old school, checklist about what's going wrong. And of course, to drive that's all about end-to-end processes, these big cycles in our organization. So we need to break down the cycles, and we break down the silos, I should say. It's about end-to-end thinking and practice. There's no point worrying about discrete tiny issues in one small end of a process. So obviously many people, and you mentioned this in your previous role, a lot of people's exposure to risk management is around the financial reporting risk and ICFR and SOX related risk, and that's important, and it's kind of a good way of coming into the domain. But this is the classic COSO and COBIT view, which I think is a helpful way of thinking about things. So your technology people can work out where they play a role and where the processes and applications play a role. And there were some surveys we did ourselves, and then we saw this Deloitte survey came out, which I thought was really good. And nearly 70% of organizations have reported significant deficiencies to the audit committee in the past 2 years. And surprise, surprise, look on the right hand side, there's a big part of it still related. We're so the intertwining of systems and of course staff competence and awareness of the processes and risks and policies and controls is another part, but systems are a big part of this. So I found that's kind of helpful thing to share. And the irony is, and this, Justin, we've talked about this a lot, there's this challenge also about when we think old school, we look at the backyard and it's all gets overgrown, and suddenly people say, we've got to fix the problem, we've got to address these risks. You end up with a beautiful picture in the middle, and then everyone moves on to the next thing and you're back where you started. But the idea of risk management being about ongoing decision making kind of stops that way of thinking, which I think is important. And one final point in end-to-end processes, risk management itself is an end-to-end process. We like to present this risk to perform process, which operates perpendicular to all the other, the revenue cycle, the spend cycle, the plan to build, all of those things. And this is the essence. And again, it focuses on making decisions and managing the business to drive performance, which I kind of quite like. Yeah. So when you mentioned before, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we thought, oh, it'll be great when COVID's over. Life's going to be so much easier. Well, it hasn't. It seems that the uncertainty has become even more significant as we get into 2024. So that's kind of food for thought. But you talked about some key recommendations for risk leaders, executives, chief audit executives, and just a few thoughts on this. One was about courage and visibility. Just want to say a couple of words about that.
Yeah. For me, this is in people who have a similar role to what I have. We're in a great position to be able to prompt risk-based discussions at the top table. Speaking to those people who are making the critical strategic decisions. We should be asking the difficult questions, and sometimes the simple questions that people just assume everyone knows the answer to. For me, that's around an example is, do we really think electrification is the only solution for us going forwards? We need to consider alternative powertrains, etc. So be courageous and visible and ask those questions. And when I open a risk conversation, very rarely do I suffer from a lack of engagement. People really actually enjoy talking about this stuff.
No, that's great. No, that's I like that example as well. So
this one, I mentioned this before, but this is what I think is a real game changer in terms of turning risk management activity into a proactive decision making support tool and enabler. So when we understand the risks, it's developing this dashboard that can give us real data that shows how is our actual risk exposure trending, and therefore what do we need to do. Can we pare back activity over here because that risk is actually sort of decreasing, and do we need to throw resource over there because actually, you know, we've got an impending supply chain issue coming in because the next Ever Given ship has blocked the Suez Canal again.
Right. Fair point. Yeah, and then there's third one here, the third, driving ownership of risk mitigation plans.
Yeah, and this is just back to the ownership piece. Is, you know, everything anyone does in my simplistic world is related to risk management. If it's not, then it's probably wasted effort. So first line management are and staff are the people who day to day manage risk, and they are best placed to be able to ensure we're doing things to mitigate risk and take action at the right time. So my second line is an enabling role to tell people this is how we want to manage risk within Aston. You guys and girls go out and smash it.
Excellent. Thank you, Justin. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. I know we're running a little bit over, but I'm going to bring a couple of these questions in. I like this. This is almost philosophical, but the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The leader adjusts the sails. I guess that's the point we've been talking about. So this is what we've covered. We've got a few of your questions here. So I'm going to bring a couple of these up, and we will finish in the next couple of minutes, but I just want to get a couple of these out. So I recall actually in the conversation, you mentioned, Justin, you have 12 principal risks in Aston Martin, but the question here is, how many principal risks do you think one organization can manage?
Oh, crikey. That's a difficult
one. Well, obviously 12 is a good answer.
yeah. So if you look at external reporting, we've done the analysis. Typically, most organizations will report between 10 and 15 principal risks. We have a corporate risk register that has 25 items on it. A number of that, 17 of those, aggregate into our principal risks for external disclosure. So I kind of think if you're getting above that sort of 12-15 mark, I think you're probably going too far.
Right.
And
that makes a lot of sense.
And I don't think if you're getting into that number, unless you've got massive teams, you can actually demonstrate appropriate control or assurance over that many risks.
Well, also you lose focus and lose the ability to communicate that to the executive committee, I imagine, as well. So I get your point there. Okay, I've got a couple more here. And this is interesting. How well, and obviously this is your general perspective, not just Aston Martin, but how well is risk management really understood at leadership level and first line management level in your experience?
Not very well is the short answer. Not very well. And the way I try and just turn that around is I constantly ask the sort of why and what questions. Why are you doing what you're doing? What do we need to do to address that issue or to prevent that action from arising? And you know, we use bow tie analysis at Aston to draw this out. So we have workshops. So you know, what could go wrong? What are you doing to stop it? If that does go wrong, what are you doing to mitigate the impact?
Right. Okay. I've got another question here, which I quite like, but I'm going to rephrase it, and I'm going to give you the real question. So my rephrasing of this question is: do you need a sense of humor to be a chief audit executive? And while you think about that, I'll tell you what the question was. Audit have a reputation for being dry, in inverted commas. How important is personality to achieve objectives? So I just put that in. You need a sense of humor.
Yeah. I think the answer to that is absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to think I have a sense of humor, but I think it boils down to actually, you know, everyone says this, but it's relationships, and can you build and foster effective relationships with your key stakeholders? So you know, I need to be able to have a conversation with our executive committee members around risk, around what they're doing right, what they could do better. And at the same time, I then need to be able to go in and you know, if people are not doing what they need to do, then I need to be flagging that and raising that to the Audit and Risk Committee. And you can only do that if you've got really good, firm relationships with people.
Yeah, and I guess the point behind the question is that you want executives and anybody in business say, oh, Justin's here, I'd like to talk to him, not have a dread of, oh no, Justin's here. So
yeah, exactly right. And again, that comes back to me, to personal integrity. You know, I want to help the business, but I appreciate I've also got to maintain my independence when I'm doing the assurance work.
Right. No, I'm with you. Right. We are 5 minutes over, so I apologize to everybody, but I'm just going to finish off with a great thank you to Justin for taking time out and sharing your experience. And I would say that I know everyone has, you know, good days and tough days, but the one thing I want everyone here to remember, that even on the toughest day, Justin drives home in a nicer car than the rest of us. So thank you very much, Justin, for joining us, and appreciate.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Cheers. Bye.